person who colored this book goes by Hi-Fi. I mean, it's kind of douchey, but he's really good with art.
Yeah, that's very douchey. You don't get to give yourself nicknames. Welcome, nerds, to another episode of the Nerds You're Looking For podcast, a weekly nerd culture podcast that discusses the culture through various segments. My name, of course, is Pat Attack. I wasn't quite sure if I was going to do that until I did it, and I immediately regretted it. I am, of course, with my co-host, that Tyler Hutt. How's it going, man?
It's going well, man. How are you?
I'm all right. Like I said, I immediately regretted that decision as soon as I said it. But
it didn't sound right, you introducing yourself as that. So I appreciate you wanting to own it, though.
Yeah, so I completely threw myself off. We have been trying to pimp everything that we have as far as our Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff. But I threw myself off and I forgot to do all of that. So if you want to follow us on Twitter and Instagram, they're both at The Nerds Podcast. Check out our website, thenerdspodcast.com. And then you can also email us at thenerdsyou'relooking4@gmail.com.
I guess my brain is programmed that whenever I hear you do that spiel, I'm ready for you to then say, for Patrick Kuhn, Tyler Hunt, I'm ready to end the podcast. So that was a strange reflex I just had.
Yeah, I was like, is he gonna? Because I kind of paused, waiting for you to chime in, and you didn't say anything, and I was like, is he gonna say something? Or?
No, I had the reflex that we were done, but we have not even started. So
yeah, no, we haven't even started. So if this is your first episode, we start off each episode by kind of just checking in with each other. We call it What We're Into. So what are you into this week?
So you had literally just asked me what I was going to be into for the podcast before we started recording, and I didn't want to tell you because I'm not proud of it, but we're gonna talk about this anyways because it is honestly the only thing I watched this week besides Arrested Development, which of course we will be reviewing in our main topic this week. And this is a movie that my wife wanted to see. It's called Life of the Party. This is going to be short because I just want to rail on this movie for a few minutes. So like I said, I went and saw this movie last night because my wife wanted to see it and because I'm a good husband. And for context, this movie is about a mom that goes back to college with her daughter when her husband divorces her. I've seen more Melissa McCarthy movies than I'd like to admit because, again, my wife is a fan. And while they're typically never good, I usually laugh at least once or twice. I can 100% say that I did not laugh or crack a smile once during this entire movie, and that is not an exaggeration. I think Melissa McCarthy can be funny, and I definitely have nothing against her as a comedic actress. I just hate the movies that she does where it's like, what kind of crazy situation can we put her in? And I mean, in all fairness, she's not alone there. I think many comedic actors fall into this category. I think somebody like Will Ferrell or Eddie Murphy have kind of fallen into that trope in the last 20 years. But what makes this situation worse is that this movie in particular was written by Melissa McCarthy and her husband, Ben Falcone, and then her husband also directed it. Through all of this, don't forget, Melissa McCarthy is an Academy Award nominated actress. And, she's been funny in movies before and has done things that are critically acclaimed like Bridesmaids. But then she also does movies like this, like Identity Thief, like Tammy, Spy, The Boss. I can keep going. These movies are just weird outlets for her, again, to play these wacky characters, and it doesn't work very well. I'd also like to point out that this movie is the first movie she's been in since Ghostbusters, which you and I both liked for the most part, if you go back and listen to that review. So that came out in 2016. She took a 2-year hiatus and came back with this movie that she co-wrote. And that's just extremely disappointing to me. I mean, I get that the film had to play it safe with the comedy because it was PG-13, but the fact that I never even smiled is just awful. And obviously, that means that the story sucked too. It's, of course, as you can probably guess, full of tropes and bad acting and poor timing and predictability. And I can keep going. I don't know. It was a terrible, terrible movie. And on top of all of that, I haven't even mentioned my movie going experience yet, which was also awful. We went to a new theater that we hadn't been to yet up here near Cleveland, in Strongsville, actually. And it's a Cinemark and it's in a mall. And so it was super busy. And the only seats that were left were the front row. They're the reclining seats that you and I are used to from the theaters in Evansville. But so that being the case, you have to pick your seats. And the only seats where you could sit together were the front row. And I told my wife we probably shouldn't do it, but she insisted. And so we got in, and you look up the whole time. I don't know if you've ever watched a movie from the front row before, but it is awful. And she looked over at me and said, yeah, this is terrible. So hopefully she learned her lesson that she should take my opinion on things. But no, it was terrible. And the more aggravating thing than the movie going experience was that my wife won't admit that I'm right about how much this movie sucked. I told her beforehand that this movie was going to blow, but she did. I mean, she still wanted to see it, obviously, which is why we went. And I sat right next to her. I saw how little she laughed and smiled, and she still will not admit that it was bad. She says it was cute. So that's frustrating as well. But yeah, I mean, if you were planning on seeing Life of the Party, which I'm assuming you in particular were not, but if any of our listeners were planning on seeing it, don't fucking see it. Like, force Melissa McCarthy to do better things. I will say, like, the one upside was there was a trailer for a movie that looks like it's from Fox Searchlight. I forget what it's called, but Melissa McCarthy plays a writer in it, and it looks like it's more of a drama, and hopefully, like, more like of an indie movie too. It's based on true events, so hopefully she can do more things like that and kind of show the talent that we know she has a little better than these movies shows it, because this shit is not good.
So I actually think it's funny because I've heard other people do it, not just to criticize you or anything, but they always talk about like, oh, well, she obviously has talent. She's been nominated for an Academy Award, and she was in Bridesmaids, and like, well, she was nominated for Academy Award for Bridesmaids. Like, you can't name those two things as separate examples of how talented she is. But honestly, she just doesn't pick her movies well, obviously, because of all the shit that you named. I will disagree a little bit. I don't think Spy should be included in that. I did enjoy Spy quite a lot. So it's definitely one of her highlights, at least for me. And again, we liked Ghostbusters a little bit more than most people. I wouldn't say that I don't even own it. So, I mean, that could kind of tell you how much I was just kind of indifferent to it, but I definitely liked it more than most because a lot of people shit on that movie undeservingly. So I'm just not interested in most of her movies. And before I thought it was because, and I'm not going to see this movie at all, so I have no idea what it was like, but for the most part, it always seemed like people just saw her as an overweight actress, and she's a comedic actress, so let's put her in weird situations where we can laugh at the fat person who fell down or did something silly. And for me, it can be funny at times in like short spurts, but some of her movies, it seemed like, especially The Heat, it seemed like that movie, that's all that movie was. And I believe her husband wrote that one as well. So it's kind of funny to sit here and be like, oh, people just don't know how to use her. Apparently her husband doesn't know how to use her. So that's a little bit weird to me. But yeah, I'm just not a fan because she's definitely not one of those people that have chosen her projects very well. I guess it's her own fault because, like you said, she helped write this movie. And I heard it was pretty bad from you, obviously, just sitting there listening. But I also heard through reviews as well that it wasn't very good. I didn't even know that this movie was coming out because her movies are not on my radar at all. Like, so yeah. And I mean, I love your wife. You guys are some of my best friends, but she does not have good taste in stuff like this. It does not surprise me that she's a Melissa McCarthy fan.
No. So the three movies that she wanted to see last night that we had to choose from were Life of the Party, Overboard, and I Feel Pretty. So that was the situation.
That makes complete sense from what I know from Brittany.
So that was my life last night. But yeah, I 100% agree. I think Melissa McCarthy needs a new agent, or she needs to stop doing her husband favors of starring in his shitty movies, because it's a pattern at this point.
So I'm confused. Did you go to the mall because you were already at the mall and you're like, oh, let's go see a movie? Or did you like, hey, let's try this new theater that happens to be at a mall? Because that seems like my worst nightmare. I hate going to malls.
We were in Strongsville already.
Oh, okay.
So just running errands up there, because it's not too far away from Medina where I'm currently living. So we were up there doing some things, and it was, well, we could see it here at this time or go back up to Medina and see it at that time. And we did not realize that it was in a mall until I put it in the GPS and we got there. So
interesting. All right.
It was not great. But anyways, yeah, what are you into?
So I am also into a really shitty movie. We had actually talked about this movie. I don't know if it was for Nerd News, or maybe we just brought it up for a Trailer Trash segment, which we do every once in a while. But that is Truth or Dare. Like I said, we talked about this when the trailer was first released, and it looked really shitty. Like we kind of trashed it a little bit. It kind of looks like your lowest common denominator horror movie. And really, we talked about this when we talked about the trailer, but you kind of almost give it the benefit of the doubt. You give it definitely a longer leash because it is produced by Blumhouse, which I always tell people, like, if you've seen a good horror movie in the last 5 years, chances are you saw a Blumhouse movie, because they've kind of cornered the market on really good horror movies. So when you see this movie and this new Blumhouse movie, even though the trailer did look really shitty and stupid, you kind of give this a little bit more of a benefit of the doubt type of situation. But unfortunately, it was not good. For those that aren't aware, Truth or Dare is about some college seniors that want to make their last spring break really count. So they go to Mexico. And while they're there, they meet a stranger in a bar who convinces them to go to this old rundown church to party, which, of course, who can turn down that awesome invitation? And then while they're there, they get convinced again by this stranger to play Truth or Dare, because that's exactly what I would want to do in a rundown, dirty Mexican church, is tell my secrets to a stranger. But of course, he convinces them to do that, and as it turns out, it's a curse. The game is cursed, and he's kind of passing this curse on to these high school, or not high school, but college seniors, and they leave Mexico and they go back to college, and then the curse follows them, and they're kind of cursed to play this game. And if they don't play the game, they die. So honestly, while I was watching this movie, about halfway through, it felt like it was a movie that somebody watched It Follows and was just like, hey, I want to make that movie, but I can't obviously just completely rip it off, so we have to have a new concept. So they brought Truth or Dare into basically the same plot of It Follows. And honestly, It Follows, and I think I've brought that movie up in the past, is not like your classic horror movie. Like, it doesn't have your classic horror moments from it. It's more of a creepy movie than it is a scary movie, but it kind of gets grouped into a horror, like the horror genre, just because nobody else knows how to describe that movie. But it is super, super creepy. But when you have a movie like that doesn't necessarily have these big horror moments, what works with It Follows is the performances are really good, the character development, the cinematography, like the way that they direct the movie with the wide angles is really great. I love the fact that they have this really awesome score, and the sound really works in that movie, because I think that in the horror genre, you have to have really good sound effects and really good sound mixing, because I think that really works, just kind of building the whole atmosphere. So all the little things in It Follows works so well, and that's what makes that movie so great. Well, I know this is going to be a weird association, but I talked about something when I did our Shocktober in Irvington interview with the guys from The Obsessive Viewer. I talked about, like, when we were talking about making a Shocktober short, I kind of talked about how we didn't know what we were doing. In horror, it's all about tension and atmosphere and kind of building those things. And we just knew that we didn't have the knowledge and the technical skill to do that. So what could we do? well, we could make it funny. And that's kind of what we did, is we made it campy and funny. And it worked that way. Well, Truth or Dare felt like somebody wanted to make It Follows, but didn't have the technical skill to make It Follows, but they still tried to make it. Like, instead of having that self-awareness that we had when we were making our Shocktober short, we decided to make it funny. They just decided we're going to make that same movie, except for just a shittier version of that movie. Like, the characters don't really work. The acting is really, really terrible. I just don't care about the teen soap opera bullshit in this movie. Like, they kind of sacrificed actual character development with this just teen soap opera stuff. Like, I don't care that the main character is in love with her best friend's boyfriend, and her boyfriend is kind of has feelings for the main character, but that his girlfriend cheats on him all the time. Like, I don't care about all of that stuff. And this is not really a criticism on the movie, so to speak, and I've talked about this before when we've discussed horror movies in the past, but the more you see the villain or the monster or whatever, it kind of takes away the power. Horror is almost like comedy. Like, the more you hear it and the more you see it, you just have the problem of diminishing returns. And unfortunately, you kind of see that smiling face in the trailer like a million times. And so that could have been pretty creepy in the movie. And there's a couple of moments where I wasn't necessarily scared, but I was a little creeped out. But I think it would have worked a lot better if I hadn't seen that face a million times in the trailer. And that's not necessarily the movie's fault. And it's not necessarily the marketing team's fault either, because you have to have something to draw these people into the movie. But, I mean, they needed to find a way to show it a little bit less in the trailer, because by the time you get to the movie and by the time it gets going and you've seen this face a million times in the trailer, it just doesn't work for me. And then the third act is just batshit crazy. And I'm just like, I was kind of checked out, to be honest with you, because this movie doesn't really hold your attention very well. And I was just like, wait a second, what? Like, what is happening right now? It was just batshit crazy. And just skip this movie. It's pretty garbage.
Yeah, I think I got more enjoyment out of you explaining the plot than I would from ever watching this movie. So thank you for that. But I thought it was interesting. When I went to the theater, whenever this was out and I was seeing different things, I noticed that this was called Blumhouse's Truth or Dare at the theater.
Oh, yeah, I didn't notice that.
Yeah, so obviously they're getting to a point where they can capitalize on their name and their production company, which is bad for them if they're going to put shit like this out a year after they put out a movie like Get Out. So, I mean, I think that Jason Blum and company need to kind of take a step back, but yeah, it sounds pretty shitty.
I'm really impressed that you know his first name. I did not know that.
yeah, man. He was on The Nerdist at one point. Really? It was a really good interview. Like, he loves horror movies, and he seems like a really cool guy, which makes me wonder, like, how a movie like this gets made under his production label.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you literally could have said anything. Eric Bloom, anything. And I would have been like, ooh, I'm impressed that you know his first name.
Well, it's Jason.
All right. Good to know. At least you guys learned something from this podcast, if anything. All right, man. So our next segment is just plainly called Comics. Tyler and I read a ton of comics each week, and we like to spotlight one or two an episode. So what'd you read this week?
I read No Justice #1, which I kind of gave an appetizer around this comic last week, since one of the segments in DC Nation #0, which was the comic I talked about last week, was a tease of this new Justice League comic. So to refresh your memory, it's written by a trio of DC writers, so Scott Snyder, James Tynion IV, and Joshua Williamson. And then it is drawn by a guy named Francis Manapool. This issue does a lot. It kind of sets up the comic arc for what this new Justice League story is going to be, and introduces all of the characters that are going to be a part of it. And typically that would be a lot for an issue 1 to handle, but the most impressive aspect of this comic is that it does that and offers the exposition you need to be bought in a way that really flows with the story and the cadence of the comic, and it doesn't feel overwhelming in doing so. I mentioned what the premise of this comic was last week, but A quick refresher is that Brainiac has come to Earth, but not necessarily as a menace this time. He's someone who's trying to save the universe because celestial beings are devouring worlds in the universe, and Brainiac's homeworld of Kolu is up next on their path of destruction. And so he has kind of abducted and split the heroes and villains from the Suicide Squad, Titans, Teen Titans, and the Justice League in a strategic and mathematical way to best combat these celestial monsters based on their I guess forte, you would say, or their power or whatever they're great at. So I really liked that concept because it gives the writers a reason to really shake up the dynamic of the characters that we already know, and what this arc is going to be seems really fun. It gets me excited for what they're able to do with that. It's just refreshing, I guess, especially with a team like the Justice League that's been pretty consistent for a long time. On top of this being a pretty good issue 1 and being a promising title going forward for DC, it also doesn't hurt that the art is amazing. Like I mentioned, it was drawn by a guy who I'm not so familiar with named Francis Manipool. But I wanted to do something in the comic segment this week that I don't typically do, which is highlight the colorist as well. The person who colored this book goes by Hi-Fi. I mean, it's kind of douchey, but he's really good with art.
Yeah, that's very douchey. You don't get to give yourself nicknames.
Especially like that, it's kind of like you're a colorist and you call yourself
Is
Hi-Fi.
it high five or hi-fi?
Hi-Fi.
Yeah, that's super douchey. I don't know which one would have been better, though.
I don't think you could go right with either of those options. But anyways, Manipool and Hi-Fi work really well together and deliver some really amazing artwork and splash pages that help to feed the exposition. There's one page in particular that stood out to me as one of the better drawn and colored comic pages I've seen in a while. And like I said, I typically... I don't want to fall into the Chasing Amy camp of saying that colorists just color in between the lines because I do appreciate what they do, but I don't appreciate it enough to typically give them a shout out in this segment. But I really appreciated what Hi-Fi did with the colors in this comic because it's very much... I don't want to keep using the word celestial, but I mean, it is celestial. It's out in space. There's all sorts of colors and you're on different planets. And I thought that really made this comic pop and kind of gave it a life. So I said this last week, this comic is pretty much the direct result of events that took place in Dark Knight's Metal. So I wasn't a fan of that comic arc, which was disappointing because it was something I was really looking forward to, but I'm absolutely grateful to it because it resulted in this Justice League comic that is written by some of my favorite DC writers, and I'm very excited to see where this story goes because I think that it has a lot of potential.
Yeah, after you talked about Dark Knight's Metal, or I think, what was the book that you actually talked about? But I know that Dark Knight's Metal kind of feeds into this book.
Last week?
Yeah. Did you talk about Dark Knight's Metal, or was it
I talked about DC Nation Zero, which
okay, yeah, that's right.
Comic.
Because, I listen to you when you talk. No, it just... I didn't really like Dark Knight's Metal. I haven't completely finished it yet. But, I was not a fan. At least what I've read so far. And I really wanted to read this book because I do like the writers that are writing on it. I reminded myself, I don't really like DC that much. So I didn't really bother with it.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that you would like this. I would probably say don't finish. I had a really hard time even finishing Dark Knight's Metal. I bought all the tie-ins as well, and I didn't even read them because after I finished the main story, I just didn't want to finish it. So knowing what I know about you and your tastes, I wouldn't finish it. I'm sure you have another stack of comics somewhere that you could read instead. So yeah, that being said, I would recommend No Justice, but again, knowing what I know about you and DC, I'm not going to twist your arm that you should read it.
All right. So the new number one that because it seems like I'm always reading a new number one every week, is a new Marvel number one, and that is Venom. And I actually like what you've been doing recently, Tyler, which is highlighting the writer or writers and artists. I need to start doing that a little bit more. I'm really, really bad about that. So this was written by a guy named Donnie Katz, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. And he actually did... I believe he did Doctor Strange for a while, which is a book that I enjoyed. I didn't stick with it just because Tyler and I, like we've talked about before, have been trying to cut out a little bit, and it wasn't a book that I was necessarily like always looking forward to every month. So I had decided to cut that one out. But I believe he was a writer on that book as well, and I really enjoyed what he did with that character. And then there was also the artist is a guy named Ryan Stegman, which I really love the art in this particular book. The writing was all right as well, but the thing that kind of blew me away with this book is definitely the artwork. I always think of Venom as this really dark and gritty type of character. That's why I was really excited when they kind of talked about the new Venom standalone movie being more of a horror movie, because I think that fits the character really well. And the way that he drew, and unfortunately I didn't write down the colorist, so I guess he deserves credit as well because of the colors that he used and kind of the dark shadows and stuff in this book that were used. It just made it feel like a horror comic and made it feel very dark and gritty, which is a lot better than some of the Agent Venom stuff that I've seen in the past, like with Flash Thompson. I didn't think he was necessarily a bad choice for Venom. I thought it was kind of cool that he was part of the Guardians of the Galaxy for a while, but it just didn't really fit with what I know of the character, and it was more of like a cartoony type of drawing when he was Venom. And I really liked that they kind of went back to the drawing board, so to speak, and went more dark and gritty with this particular character because I feel like it fits it better. And of course, we talk about this a lot with DC and Marvel, like they're always trying to like rebrand and restart, and I guess they have like this fresh start initiative with a few books in the Marvel comic universe, and Venom's one of them. And you kind of roll your eyes a little bit, but I actually think that this comic did a really good job of feeling like a new number one, because we know the story about Venom and how he came to Earth, but they're kind of retconning that a little bit, and they're kind of going a little bit further back, and Venom's been here a little bit longer than we thought he had been, and so I thought that was pretty cool. Like they're taking a wider scope with the character, and I really enjoy that. Like that's what I want a lot of my new number ones to be. When you're taking a character like this and you're starting over, give me something different, because I feel like some of these number ones, when they're doing these big characters, they want to play it safe because they don't want to ruin something that is canon. Like they don't want to put something in that is canon now and that somebody's going to have to go back and retcon later. And I really like that they took a little bit more chances with this character, and then they brought in some new stuff that I'd never heard before. And of course, again, the artwork is just amazing. So I definitely, if you have any interest in the character whatsoever, I think Venom number one is definitely worth a read.
I could have swore I just read a Venom number one a few months ago, because I started reading a Venom series and I ended up dropping it because I didn't like it as much. I could have swore it was just Venom number one.
Yeah, I want to say that they've been doing a lot of stuff with the character. I don't know if it was a Venom number one recently, but I know they've been doing a lot of stuff with Venom.
I know they did Venomized.
Yeah.
And some other things. I don't know. Whatever works. Like it sounds like this was pretty good. So that's exciting because I like the character of Venom quite a bit. But I don't know that I'll be able to fit this into the giant stack of comics I still need to read.
Yeah, that's fair. I know that we talk about this a lot. I will say that the middle of the book does get kind of dragged down by some exposition, so maybe I don't like it as much as some other people. Like I've heard people like rave about this book, and yes, it's really good, but I'm not sure I necessarily like it as much as everyone does, but it's definitely worth a read.
Awesome.
All right, so what's nerd news this week?
So a few different things here. The first, luckily I only have one trailer this week to bring up. Or actually, I didn't have this written down, but there are two trailers I saw this week I wanted to bring up, and I'm sure you've seen neither. But the first,
maybe I can surprise you. I think I watched a trailer this week.
Did you watch the trailer for Luke Cage season 2?
I did not.
Okay, so we both liked Luke Cage season 1 quite a bit. And we were both very disappointed with Jessica Jones season 2, but the trailer for Luke Cage season 2 looks really good. So I'm excited for it. It looks like, I don't want to get my hopes up, but it looks like there are some lighter moments to it. Like the character's kind of more comfortable now, and he kind of makes some wisecracks in the trailer. So I hope that is something that's prevalent throughout the series, because like you and I have both said in the reviews we've done of these Marvel shows, they take themselves a little too seriously sometimes, especially given the fact that they're part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and those movies they usually have funny moments. So the fact that they haven't done that with these characters is a little weird, but hopefully there's some of that in Luke Cage season 2. But besides that, it looks pretty good.
Yeah, but I think we said that before, like with Luke Cage, the trailer for that, especially the one that I think you see after Daredevil season 2, was it? And they show like that, they autoplay that trailer right after it. And I think we said the same thing, was like, oh man, they're finally going to make these shows funny a little bit. At least they have one character that's funny. And then season 1 of Luke Cage was not funny hardly at all.
No, and I mean, I get it. And I think that it's still going to be like a heavy subject matter, and it's going to deal a lot with race. And I think in the trailer, they even say it's a bulletproof black man at one point. So I think that they're still going to deal with like a lot of those cultural things. But if that character could just make a joke here or there, it'd be so much more fun to watch. So yeah, we'll see. The next trailer that I saw this week was the trailer for Predators.
I did watch that one. That was the one that I watched.
Okay, cool. What'd you think? This is one of your Rotten Tomato film draft movies. What'd you think?
Yeah, I'm real nervous. So I don't remember exactly what I said. I know that it was one of my later picks, obviously, because, and I talked about this last episode when I talked about Predator being one of my favorite movies that was released in the year that I was born. But I also mentioned that the year that I was born wasn't a great year for movies either. But this is a movie franchise that maybe didn't deserve to be a movie franchise. And there hasn't been a ton of really good movies from this franchise. You really have the first one, and then Predator 2 is garbage. And then, of course, the Alien versus Predator movies are garbage. Predators, that was put out a few years ago, that's a pretty good movie. Like as far as the Predators are concerned, like that franchise, it's really good there. It's up there with the first one as being the second best, but I mean it's pretty easy to be second best in this particular franchise.
Yeah.
But just judging by the trailer, I'm real nervous about this movie. It looks like just action garbage. Like it doesn't look good.
Yeah, I thought the beginning of it was kind of promising because it's like a kid and it has like a very suburban feel, which is a throwback to like 80s horror movies a little bit, but then it completely turns into military action garbage after that. So yeah, I'm curious to see what way this movie goes. I mean, obviously a lot of respect for Shane Black, and I like his movies quite a bit, so I do have some trust in him, but the first trailer was not promising, so we'll see.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a good point. I think that's one of the reasons why going into this movie, I was a little bit more hopeful, was because Shane Black was doing it. And it seems like it's something that he is into. He's definitely into the franchise. So that would make sense.
And both into the franchise and in the franchise.
Yes, so that would definitely make sense. And of course, we liked Nice Guys. We also liked, I liked Iron Man 3. I know that it's not your favorite Marvel movie by any means, but I liked it more than most. So I'm definitely hopeful, but this trailer made me a lot more nervous than I originally was.
Yeah, I agree. So the next story is that Sherlock Holmes is going to get another movie, the Robert Downey Jr. version, that is. It's going to come out December of 2020. So about, what is that, like 2.5 years? So yeah, that's going to get made.
Well, it's like a year and a half.
Nope. 2.5 years.
Nope, you're right. I shouldn't have corrected you. Math is definitely not my strong suit. Nope, so, you're right. I mean, I'm embarrassed.
I liked the first one quite a bit, and the second one was okay. So this just seems a little delayed to me, I guess. But I mean, of course, I'll see it. So
Yeah, I'm not going to hold my breath that this movie is ever going to get made, to be honest with you. Like, I know that they announced, like, oh, well, they're going to make another one, but they announced that they were going to make a Gambit movie, and we're still waiting on that. So, yeah, I would be really surprised if we see this movie. I know that Robert Downey Jr. has been wanting to do another one for a while, and I've been wanting them to do another one, too, because I really don't think that the second one's okay. I was really disappointed with the second one. I thought it was pretty bad. I really liked the first one a lot. I know that people had problems with it because it's not their Sherlock Holmes, I guess, because he was much more combative. Like, yeah, I mean, he could actually fight in the first one, and that's really not Sherlock Holmes from the books and then the most recent series. So I kind of understand that to a certain extent, but you kind of have to put your own spin on the character and make it more exciting for today's audiences. And I really liked the spin on the character. So unfortunately, the second one was just kind of boring to me. I didn't really like it. And the plot was very predictable. But I'm definitely looking forward to a third one. I'm just not going to hold my breath.
for sure, I'm right there with you. So next story is that we have a release date and a title for Jordan Peele's new movie. So his new film is going to come out next March. It's called Us. And it doesn't sound like it's filming yet. I mean, he's going to write and direct it, but they're saying that the cast is going to include Elizabeth Moss, Lupita Nyong'o, and Winston Duke. He didn't release a description or like what the movie's going to be about or anything, but he did release a poster. I feel like that's a pretty short turnaround if he hasn't started filming yet for it to come out next March. But maybe it's not. I don't know. I would think like a psychological horror movie, you wouldn't really need much time in like the editing room or anything like that, or adding special effects or anything like that. So, I mean, obviously he feels pretty confident in making that release date. But speaking of Blumhouse, from what you were into, it will again be put out by Blumhouse, just as Get Out was. So, I mean, I don't know anything about this movie except for what I just told you. But of course, I'm excited for it because I loved Get Out so much.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely somebody now, just because how much we loved Get Out, that you trust. Like, yeah, it is a short turnaround. Like, that would make me nervous. But like you said, it's probably going to end up being, because it's a Blumhouse movie, it's probably going to end up being kind of a, not necessarily an indie horror movie, but sort of just kind of a very small budget type of horror movie, just because you don't really need a whole lot for those types of movies. And that's kind of what Blumhouse has kind of made their mark on, is those just like those indie horror movies. So I'm definitely looking forward to it, even though we don't know much about it. You just the fact that he's involved in it and he made Get Out and he's made good things in the past, you kind of just assume that it's going to be good.
Absolutely, man. So I'm definitely excited for that one. The last piece of nerd news I have this week is that a bunch of shows got canceled.
Yep.
Unfortunately. So, I mean, we'll talk a little bit about this because even though Brooklyn Nine-Nine got canceled, it immediately got picked back up. But in addition to Brooklyn Nine-Nine getting canceled, Last Man on Earth was canceled, Lucifer was canceled, The Inhumans was officially canceled, amongst a lot of other shows. But those are
was that show even really still going on?
No, I just finally got an announcement. But you know, those are kind of the shows that I think play to us a little bit. I'm sorry if I missed any that you're interested in. I'm sure you can add anybody to it. But like I mentioned, Brooklyn Nine-Nine got canceled the same day as Last Man on Earth, and the internet cried out in pain. And immediately, like the day after it got canceled, NBC picked it up for a season 5, which I'm pretty stoked about because I'm still loving that show. I'm very disappointed about Last Man on Earth being canceled. I know that Will Forte wanted one more season to kind of cap it off and end it appropriately, and now he's not going to get that. So I'm assuming, I think the series finale then would be tonight or next Sunday, but I'm sure it's going to end on a cliffhanger like all of those seasons do, which is going to be disappointing because obviously we'll never get a resolution to that. And that's, again, a show that I've really liked over the last few years. So yeah. As far as Lucifer and the Inhumans go, I never watched either of those, but I know that the internet also was pretty upset when Lucifer got canceled. So I did hear there is a rumor Gotham could possibly not come back. So we'll cross our fingers for that one. but yeah, any shows that you love that got canceled this week?
I mean, obviously Brooklyn Nine-Nine is the big one. That's a show that I don't really keep up with big network shows anymore. I've actually officially canceled my PlayStation View. So I've gone completely like Hulu, Netflix, all that good stuff. So I don't watch a lot of the network shows anymore. But that was definitely one that I kept up on as much as I could, like on Hulu and such. But yeah, I guess Last Man on Earth, I'm part of the problem because I did like the first 2 seasons. But it was definitely something that I wouldn't watch while it was on. I would wait until the season was over and then kind of catch up later. So I'm definitely part of the problem with that particular show. I am bummed because, like you said, a lot of the seasons ended on a cliffhanger. And if he was hoping to get another season to kind of wrap everything up, I guarantee you that this season will end on a cliffhanger as well. And we'll never get that satisfaction. So that's kind of a bummer. Obviously, Brooklyn Nine-Nine got picked back up by NBC for another season. So hopefully we don't have to do this again next year. Maybe they'll go ahead and renew it like halfway through the season for a couple more seasons. Or maybe they're already working on a deal with Hulu, because I know Hulu was in the mix for a little bit. So maybe they'll just do one season on NBC and then jump to Hulu for a couple of seasons. I don't know. Inhumans wasn't a big deal. Never watched it. Looked really, really fucking stupid. I'm not a huge fan of Inhumans as a group anyways. I do think Black Bolt is kind of an interesting character. And of course, I love dogs. So Lockjaw is pretty cool. Especially like bulldogs. So I love Lockjaw. But yeah, the Inhumans as a group doesn't really fascinate me that much. And it was getting terrible reviews and nobody was watching it. So I was pretty indifferent. Maybe indifferent's not even a strong enough word for it, because I did not care about this show at all. I will say that I was pretty happy that, and you didn't mention this at all because you were really kind of just talking about the shows that got canceled, but I'm super psyched that we're going to get plenty more of Rick and Morty.
Oh yeah, that did get announced this week. 70 episodes that they've agreed to. So, they typically do 10 episode seasons. So 7 more seasons of Rick and Morty, which is obviously
a lot.
Yeah, it's awesome. So that's exciting. It's funny because at one point, like going back to the Inhumans, like Marvel had big plans for them. Like they had movies announced and then they took them off the calendar and they ended up doing this show. And I don't know, they kind of shit the bed with the characters. So if they're interested in ever bringing those characters back into the fold, I wondered how they would do it. But I guess if the deal with Fox goes through, they wouldn't really need them because they'd have the mutants. So who knows?
Yeah, and that was always kind of the knock on the Inhumans, was the fact that and I've said this myself, is it felt like Marvel wanted more X-Men and just didn't call them X-Men, called them Inhumans, and they were gonna, as far as the MCU, we're going to kind of just use the Inhumans and as their X-Men. And they were really, at least the comics, because we've talked about this before in the past, it seems like the comics definitely tried to shadow the movies in the MCU and the shows a lot. And so it seemed like the comics were pushing the Inhumans. Right when the show was about to come out, it seemed like the Inhumans were the it thing. Like they were kind of putting the X-Men on the back burner and really trying to pump out the Inhumans, and it never worked. Obviously, it didn't work because the show was garbage, but yeah, I'm just hoping that we'll get more of the X-Men now.
Yeah, hopefully, man. So that is all I have for nerd news.
All right, so we are back this particular main topic to reviewing. We kind of took a week break from reviewing anything, and this review is going to be a lot different than most of our regular reviews. We're going to be reviewing the new, I guess, season of Arrested Development. Basically, recently they announced that not only is there going to be a new season of Arrested Development, a season 5, I believe they've already set the release date of May 29th, if I'm not mistaken. They also announced that they're going to be recutting and re-releasing season 4. And I guess they decided to call it Fateful Consequences. So If you're not aware, Arrested Development was canceled by Fox after 3 seasons, even though it was a fan favorite. It won a ton of awards. And then it was revived by Netflix years later for a season 4. But unfortunately, because of scheduling conflicts with the actors, because basically it got canceled by Fox, and a lot of these actors at the time weren't like super well known. I guess Jason Bateman was maybe the biggest star of all of them.
From Teen Wolf 2.
Yeah, well, he was in Silver Spoons when he was a kid too, so he was well known. I would say that he was probably the biggest star out of all of them. Maybe David Cross, because he did stand up and he did Mr. Show on I think that was on HBO.
And Small Soldiers.
Oh, and Small Soldiers. I forgot about that shitty Dennis Leary movie. But anyways, after that show got canceled, all these actors became bigger stars, and they kind of went on and did their own thing. And when they came back for season 4, there was a lot of scheduling conflicts, and the show decided to do what they called kind of a Rashomon style of storytelling, which there's no way that I pronounced that correctly. Anyways, they I completely butchered it. I realized as I was saying it, I was like, this is not how they pronounce that. But basically, it was kind of, they would tell each character's story individually, and then they would all kind of come together at the end. And at the time when this was first released, I believe it was 2013, I was just happy that we were getting more Arrested Development. But as time went on, and I've talked about this before, Arrested Development's one of those shows that I would watch periodically, just rewatch it every once in a while. And as time went on, it was harder and harder to get through season 4, because it's just not as good as the other seasons. And I wasn't a huge fan of season 3. And so it was really, for me, my fandom was season 1 and 2. But season 4 is definitely by far the hardest season to get through. And Mitchell Hurwitz, now I'm like in my head about pronouncing things this episode. He just announced that, again, like I said, there would not only be a new season coming soon, they decided to recut season 4 so the stories would actually interweave more. I think that you mentioned when we were talking about reviewing the new season 4, the remix or whatever you want to call it, that you actually haven't watched the original season 4?
Correct. I have not.
So I was actually surprised. I mean, not necessarily that surprised, because there was a lot of nerd news, big stories that came out this week, but I'm surprised that you didn't mention this. But apparently there's some controversy with them recutting this season because of the way the actors got paid for season 4. I was reading an article, and I don't know if you read it as well. Basically, they were paid more for their characters' individual episodes, and then they got like a little bit of money if their characters were in the other characters' main episodes. And now, because it was recut, they want basically money again, which just seems kind of silly to me.
Yeah, so the article I read said that, I mean, it was basically pay per episode, which was originally 15 episodes, and now it's 22 episodes. And I don't know where I fall in this argument. Like, I kind of see the cast side of it, but at the end of the day, they didn't do any more work than when they originally got paid, and they took that footage and they edited it down to shorter episodes. So it's not like there's a ton more footage that they put in or anything. It's just presented differently. So yeah, I'm sure somebody's making money off of this new cut. Come on, guys. Does Jason Bateman need another mansion?
Yeah, I get it in the sense that it is 22 episodes. And from what I understand, they did use, to kind of glue some of these episodes together, they did use some footage that was filmed at the time, basically just to help other actors kind of do their individual episodes. So it was never filmed to use in the episode, and so they used footage that had never been seen before, and so I guess the actors are a little bit upset about that. But I mean, come on, I get it in that sense, and I also understand that. I think he even mentioned this in his announcement, that they also did this this new season or recut this season 4 because their deal with Netflix is going to be ending soon, and they're going to sell the syndication rights in season 4. The way that it was originally shown doesn't really work in syndication because you basically can just, you wouldn't want to watch episode after episode of season 4. So they basically recut it so you can kind of watch an episode every once in a while and still be okay with it. Like, to watch it originally, the way that originally season 4 was released would be weird on syndication. So that was a big part of why they recut it. And I get that. Like, they're going to make more money the way that they recut season 4 versus the way that they would have if they had kept it the way that it was. So I get the actors are like, well, you should probably pay us a little bit of that money. And I get that. But at the same time, like you said, they didn't have to do any extra work. Like, he was doing the editing, or whoever was doing the editing behind the scenes while probably they were filming season 5 or around the time they were filming season 5. So yeah, I get it, both angles, but at the same time, it's like, come on, guys. Like, and to look at the numbers that they got paid is fucking ridiculous.
Oh, for sure.
Like I said, this review is going to be a little bit different than our normal reviews. We're going to kind of start it off the same, but as far as I'm concerned, like, I've watched season 4 a couple of times, so most of my review of this remix is going to be kind of focused on how it's different and does it work versus the original way that it was released. I'm not going to necessarily talk about the show in general like we would normally in a review, but I know, like I said, Tyler, you haven't seen season 4 before you saw the remix, so you're going to have a little bit different perspective than I did, but we will start off with a broad strokes, which is kind of a general overview of how we felt about whatever we're reviewing. So what'd you feel about season 4, Fateful Consequences?
So, like you said, I have nothing to compare this to because I never watched the original season 4. The reason why I never watched it, if you're curious, is because I just never heard good things about it, and it seemed cheap to me since they couldn't get all of the actors together for most of it. So I just never interested me as much as I liked the original run of Arrested Development. With that being said, that thought was in the back of my mind while I watched this, the Fateful Consequences. There were obvious examples of green screen, and there were lots of characters talking on the phone to one another, and also just convoluted character threads that Ron Howard had to remind us of every episode to kind of make sure we know what was actually happening. So all of those things coupled together, like, I wasn't very bought into this season. There were still definitely parts that I really enjoyed and that made me laugh quite a bit, but it just still doesn't come close to those first 3 seasons for me. I hope that they can course correct with season 5, and hopefully they were able to get more of the cast together to actually film for that new season that's coming out, because this was overall, even a new cut of it where more characters were featured per episode was, I mean, it was still kind of blatant and still kind of disappointing to me.
Oh yeah, for sure. And my broad strokes is Arrested Development may be some of the smartest comedy writing I've ever seen, especially in TV, especially those first couple of seasons, the first 2 seasons. Honestly, there's so many things in those, especially those first couple of seasons, where something small will happen and then you're just like, okay, well, and you just kind of forget about it, and then it comes back like later in the episode or later in the season or even later in the series, and you're just like, holy shit, that's fucking genius that they did this small thing and they make it pay off like seasons later or episodes later. And I've talked about this before when I've discussed this show. I would rewatch it every so often, and it just proves how genius it is that somebody that has seen this show from start to finish multiple times. I've probably rewatched this show from start to finish maybe 10 times, especially the first 3 seasons. There would be things and threads, because there's so many small little tiny jokes in the show, that I would rewatch it and see it and finally get the joke. And there was so many jokes and there's so many layers to this show that I would rewatch it and find something new the 10th time that I've seen this episode, or the 20th time I've seen this episode, that I never caught before. And that's just shows you how genius it is. And I think that's why season 4 felt so disappointing, was it didn't feel like it was Arrested Development. It felt like somebody was doing a poor Arrested Development impression. And that's why I kind of, when I first heard the announcement, I kind of felt like I had high hopes for the recut, because I was hoping the stories would come together and make it feel more like the show. But the comedy just isn't as funny to me. And I think the way that they originally released season 4 with the individual episodes, I was like, well, this doesn't feel like Arrested Development because of the way that they're showing me the episodes, like the individual episodes. So I was like, well, maybe the comedy isn't the problem. Maybe it's just the fact that the way that they shot it and the way that they released it. But now watching this recut, I'm just like, this comedy is just not as funny as I remember it being. And that's the thing that really stuck with me while I was watching it, was I just don't think that these gags are that funny. They tried to do the same thing that they have always done, where they will have this small tiny joke and then 2 episodes or 3 episodes later it will come back, and it just didn't hit for me because I just don't think the comedy's that funny. And I think that the last 5 episodes I maybe laughed one time, and I don't really like the pilot episode that much because it kind of just gets you going. It doesn't really have too many jokes in it, but I think I would laugh more at the pilot episode than I laughed in the last 5 episodes of season 4 remix combined.
Yeah, that's interesting. I kind of thought that you'd be more positive, so surprised, I guess, that you weren't too high on it.
Yeah, I just think that the recutting just overemphasized how not funny. I mean, it is funny. There are some gags, and we're going to get into it, especially in Nerd Favorite. That's going to be my question, is what your favorite joke from season 4 was. And so there's a couple of gags in there, especially the Job stuff, that I really liked. But let's just jump right into the story. What'd you feel about the story? I'm very curious because you've never seen the season 4 before.
So obviously, like I said, there were some parts of it that I thought were really funny, but the story itself is where it gets dicey for me. There were some particular threads that I really enjoyed and thought were hilarious, but then there were others that did nothing for me. So, for example, like you mentioned, Job was my favorite thread of this season. I thought that it was really hilarious, but then I thought Lindsay's thread was really lame and it was really boring. So it was hit or miss quite a bit. And while I do imagine that this new remix is a better edit than the original edit, that doesn't make up for it, in my opinion. If I had watched this as episodes designated to each character, there would have been quite a few episodes that I just had no interest in or disliked. So since the threads of the story for each character wove in and out of each episode, I could kind of forgive certain segments if it was surrounded by segments I enjoyed. So I guess at the end of the day, maybe I do appreciate the new edit, but it doesn't save all of it. The new edit set aside, there are some character problems I had in this season, and I mean, it would have existed in the original cut as well. There are a few different ones, but the most notable for me is Michael. That character seemed really off this season. He's always done everything to protect his family and was the only moral character on the show, but then he spends this season acting like the rest of them, which just didn't feel right to me. Also, like I mentioned in broad strokes, things got a little convoluted for me at times, which forced there to be recaps by Ron Howard each episode, and a 22-minute comedy shouldn't need that to, it shouldn't need to constantly explain what's going on. And I get that maybe it was done for syndication purposes, but that many character threads shouldn't get that confusing. So overall, I would say there were things that I definitely liked quite a bit and I laughed pretty hard at, but there were probably more things that I disliked, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, and I feel like sometimes when we do our reviews, I should just argue with you for the sake of arguing, like to make it interesting, but like you nailed it exactly how I feel about this show, like season 4 of Arrested Development. Like, I really love the Job stuff. Even in the original release, like that was my favorite episodes. Like the Job stuff is by far the best stuff in this season. Like, I remember when they first released season 4, my wife and I were working weird schedules. Like, we had just gotten married, and we were living in this really small apartment, and I worked second shift, so I wouldn't get home until like midnight, but she had to work in the morning, so a lot of times she was already asleep when I would get home. And our living room and the bedroom shared a wall in this small apartment that we had. And I literally woke her up at like 1 o'clock in the morning laughing how hard I was laughing at one of the Job episodes. Like, that's how much I loved his stuff in this season. And I think the recutting this season does help, because some of the characters getting their own episodes in the original season 4, they can't hold their own episodes. Like the Lindsay stuff, you completely hit the nail on the head. That shit is so boring to me. And I love the recut in the sense that I no longer have to watch those boring ass episodes all in one chunk. Like, they cut it up so I don't have to watch all of it at the same time. And so I appreciate that. I will say that George Michael stuff just doesn't do it for me, and the Lindsay stuff doesn't do it for me. Lindsay has never really been my favorite character. She has her moments here and there. The Michael and Lindsay stuff that would pop up in the first couple of seasons, I did enjoy, but her on her own, like her own story, just doesn't interest me at all. The George Michael stuff did bother me in this show just because he has been one of my favorite characters in the first 3 seasons, and his story just wasn't interesting to me at all. And maybe that's because he kind of gets dragged down a little bit with Maybe, but George Michael and Maybe stuff was always fun, and it just didn't seem that fun in this season. The Tobias stuff was pretty good. I mean, it's not his best work as far as the character's concerned, but I still thought that the Fantastic Four stuff was pretty funny. So I do like the fact that they recut it, and his stuff is more, it feels like he was kind of off doing his own thing, and it feels more with the recut that he's more part of the family in this season, so I did appreciate that. I wish the Cinco de Cuatro stuff mattered more. That felt like just more of an excuse to bring them all together, kind of what they do in season 3, where they bring them all together on the boat. The Cinco de Cuatro stuff just felt like, oh, we needed a reason to bring them all together at the end, and that just didn't work for me. I think it's a funny gag, because it definitely does feel like something that she would do, that they would do just to screw with the housekeepers. But as far as how it works in this season, it just doesn't pay off for me.
Yeah, no, I agree.
All right, so performances seem kind of silly to do, because all of these characters, I mean, they've been doing it for 4 seasons now, and I will say that Lindsay just doesn't work for me. I just don't think Portia, I don't know her last name.
Portia de la Rose or something like that?
Yeah, something like that. I just don't think she's a very good actress. And so
Portia
she just
DeGeneres?
Yeah, basically. She's just not good for me. Like, it doesn't, and you feel like she got a little work done, maybe, I don't know, but yeah, she's just
a little, yeah.
I was trying to be generous, but yeah, so I've never liked her, but everybody else is really good.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I don't think that she's amazing, but I'm not going to sit here and complain about any of the people on the show. Like you said, this is their 4th time around doing these characters, and the show's critically acclaimed for a good reason. So you're right. It seems kind of silly to nitpick here and there. Like, I feel like everybody knows their characters and did great.
And the last segment that I have, we're going to go ahead and skip notable episodes just because we're talking about a remix. We're not necessarily talking about a brand new season of television, is the comedy. And I've kind of talked about this a little bit, so I've kind of already blown my load a little bit. But the comedy in this season just isn't as funny. Again, when it was originally released, I blamed a little bit of it. I was like, oh, maybe it's just the new way that they shot this season. Maybe that's why I don't think it is funny, is because the way that they shot the season, it just kind of is very distracting. But now watching it as the recut, it's just like, well, it just kind of feels like somebody's doing an Arrested Development impersonation.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like, the comedy, some of it hit really hard.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Whenever we get to nerd favorite, like, there were some gags that I laughed pretty hard at, but the ones that didn't hit really slowed the whole series or the whole season down for me, and it caused me to zone out quite a few times. So it's not necessarily easily forgiven for the stuff that did hit, but I mean, I'm glad that I watched the less entertaining stuff to get to the gags that really made me laugh quite a bit.
Yeah, and one thing, and I'm glad that you brought this up, is one thing that's bad about their style of writing and the way that they do Arrested Development is they do these small little gags and then they always bring them back. Well, if it didn't work the first time, like, I mean, you're taking a huge risk, and that's what it felt like in season 4, was that they tried these jokes and they just didn't work. Well, their style is to continue doing a callback. Well, when the callback didn't work originally, like, the callbacks aren't going to work. So, yeah, I completely agree there. And do we want to give it a star rating?
I mean, I gave it 3 stars for whatever it's worth.
Okay, yeah. I gave it 2.5 just because, like I said, I just assumed I was disappointed in season 4 because of the way that they originally released it, and then this just kind of emphasized for me as a hardcore fanboy of this series, it just kind of emphasized how just not funny it was. So I gave it 2.5. But I mean, there's definitely some moments that I do like the Job stuff and the Tobias stuff. But as far as nerd favorite is concerned, we take turns asking each other a nerdy question, like what your favorite blank is, whatever the topic is. It's my turn to choose the topic. And like I mentioned before, we're going to talk about our favorite joke from season 4 of Arrested Development. And for me, it's pretty easy. I mean, there's a lot of stuff like the Job stuff. I do like the Steve Holt stuff. I think that he's a character that is used really well in the first 3 seasons of that show, and the fact that he is being disappointed by not just Job and maybe in this season, I think is pretty funny. But the Tobias sexual predator, like registered sex offender stuff is really funny. But the single joke that I laughed the hardest on is the Cinco de Cuatro stuff, where he has to say that he's a registered sex offender every time the kids run by him. I think that is by far the funniest joke in this entire season. So yeah, that is my favorite joke from Arrested Development season 4.
Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you. There are a lot. I also love the sexual offender stuff. Like whenever he walks in and he says, "Daddy needs to get his rocks off," and then he says he's here to see his daughter. Maybe,
yeah.
Just like the play on her name, like that. All that's funny. I like that Job fills all of the houses with sexual predators, and then Rebel Allie brings her son there, and he goes and he jumps in the pool, and then when he comes up, the pool's completely empty. And how much they all love George Michael because he looks young. It's just like there's a lot of cool stuff littered throughout that's really funny. But I think my favorite gag is whenever Job is doing the magic tricks at his wedding, the Christian themed magic tricks, and it goes wrong and he gets stuck in the prop, and then he ends up on like Storage Wars.
Yeah,
they open up the
he's eating red vines
unit. Yeah, he's like still handcuffed and half naked and eating red vines. It's just that got me pretty good. So I would say that's probably my favorite.
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, a lot of the Job stuff is really good. The roofie cycle, I thought it was really high concept, but I thought that was pretty funny as well. I mean, basically all the Job stuff is really good in this, and the Tobias stuff. They're my 2 favorite characters in the whole show. So I definitely like the fact that they're really well done in this season.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
All right, so that is it for episode 189 of the Nerd You're Looking For podcast. As always, we hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, subscribe, rate, review us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, basically any good podcatcher you use. You can also check out our website, thenerdspodcast.com. Comment and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Nerds You're Looking For. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. They're both at The Nerds Podcast. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Google+. Email us at thenerdsyou'relooking4@gmail.com. And lastly, vote for us for Podcast of the Month at podcastland.com. For Patrick Kuhn,
Tyler Hunt,
we are the Nerds You're Looking For. Take it easy, guys.
Later, guys.